that's what we're tying today.
So to wrap up this section on extended body tube flies, I want to show you how to put together a multi-jointed tube fly tail so that you can imitate a Bob Popovich's mono beast while tying on tubes, so you can make really long tails that have little to no stress at the tie-in zone. Let's do this. So for all of you who are interested in this style of tying, I did add the HMH tube fly starter kit to my website. So it comes with the adapter tool, comes with 2 different pins, one for the large rigid tubes, one for the small, and then it comes with a bunch of different tubes, the large, the small, and junction tubing to fit both. So check that out. Now I also have the large and the small rigid tubing on the website, so you guys can check that out. The small rigid tubing is fairly nuanced, so it's very low diameter, it's very close to monofilament. And that's what I'm going to tie on today. I'm going to tie on the small rigid tubes. Now, there's some pros and cons to this, right? We've talked about how the closer you are to the diameter of the monofilament, the smaller the circumference of the tube, the less material you need to fill it in, or the less dubbing brush it's going to eat up as you turn it. Now, these small rigid tubes, that might sound super ideal for everything, but there's always some pros and cons, right? The first is that the pin that it's lined with isn't very rigid, right? Because it has to be a small diameter to fit the small diameter tube. So it's got a lot of flex to it. So this is going to be really hard to tie on, or really hard to wrap a dubbing brush on, because it has so much flex. But if you reduce the moment arm, you shorten the tube section, you reduce the leverage that your thread or your dubbing brush has on that. So this is like a perfect opportunity to tie in either short sections, if you're to do like a bucktail deceiver extension or a bulkhead extension, or like the PR378, like a swim bait rig on the 2-aught. This would be absolutely perfect, right? But you're not going to be able to scale it up. You're going to have to move to the large rigid tubing so that you have a stiffer needle so you could tie on a longer section. The other downside is just the inner diameter. So you're not going to be able to line them with everything. So like this will fit the 30 pound Perlon hard monofilament leader material, no problem. It'll fit the 40 pound, no problem, but it won't fit the 50 or 60, right? So that's kind of cool, because you can now tie a beast. Like tying 30 pound in hand would be fairly hard to do hollow ties on, but I could tie, this is rigged with 30 pound, so I can have a limper tail material run through the tube that I wouldn't necessarily be able to do if I were to do the mono in hand, because I'd want to favor that 50 or 60 pound range so that it's easier to work with, so that it's stiffer. So that's kind of cool. When you do like your cores, let's say like this 1x7, 40 pound, that'll fit in no problem. You can even do like nylon coated, which is 24 thousandths of an inch, fits in no problem. If you do your titanium, your 65 pound nickel titanium, and of course you could run it down to 45 or 25, which I wouldn't do, but 65. You can even fit 65 strand by strand, so you can fit it doubled over, and 2 strands will fit through that small will fit through that small rigid tubing, no problem. But what you're not going to be able to do is you're not going to be able to tie an extended body and rig it with a stinger hook, if you can see that hook hanging out of there, because it won't fit the core material to rig all of the tubes with the doubled up stinger wire. So in summary, the large rigid tubing kind of can do everything at a cost of a slightly larger diameter. So it's going to take more material to fill it up, or it's going to eat up more dubbing brush. The small rigid tubing is ideal for being able to do shorter sections like bucktail deceiver or bulkhead extensions, or being able to do a very sparsely tied beast fly without a stinger hook. So that's kind of the niche that it fits in. So with all that being said, let's tie some small tube sections here, and I'll show you how to put together a Build-A-Beast. So I'm going to take this long section of small rigid tubing, I'm going to cut it up into small sections so that it doesn't have a lot of leverage on the pin, and then we're going to put everything together. Now you can cut this to whatever length you want. You could do 1-inch sections, or you could do 3/4-inch sections, or you could do 1/2-inch sections, which get a little tricky because you're really close to the tool, so there's not a lot of room to work with. But I'm going to do 3/4-inch spacing, and I'm just going to cut 4 or 5 of these at 3/4 of an inch. So I got my tubes cut to 3/4 inch. I'm going to suck that needle onto that tube pretty hard. I'm going to push it down onto that knife blade so that it can't rotate. I have this pushed up so the needle has a 90 degree to stop everything, and I have it pushed up just so I know where it is so I don't poke my thumb on it. I'm going to come in with my Danville 6/1000 of an inch fine monofilament thread, and I'm going to lay down a thread base just back from this iron. I'm going to tie on the same spot on the tube every single time, and as long as you tie on the same spot of the tube every single time, you'll get that 3/4-inch spacing. Like I mean, it should make sense, but like if you cut them all to 1/2 inch, but you tie in the middle, then there's a 1/2 inch spacing between both middles. right? There's a 1/4 inch on each tube, which adds up to a 1/2. So as long as you tie in the same spot, you'll get that spacing that you designated and how long you cut the tube. So that's why we're tying up here. I don't want to tie in the middle and I don't want to tie in the back because the tool gets in the way. Now when I'm tying for myself, that doesn't happen because I'll use my converter tool, which converts my standard or my Spartan into an inline tube vise, which is sick because then everything is symmetrical and nothing's in the way. But I'm going to show you how to do it with this because this is probably what most of you are going to have. Get some Minnesota Flame from Musky Fool. Clean out the butt section. I'm just going to square these up. I'm not trying to introduce taper here. I'm just squaring them up so they're all flush. Giovanni pinch that right into place. Get some light pressure on it. Use your non-dominant hand so that your thumb's not on top of that pin, that 90-degree right there. But use both hands to manipulate this. Takes a little bit of practice, but you'll get it. Once you've pinched and pushed that all the way around so it's symmetrical, draw out the slack, wrap down those butts, put a little Chinese finger trap in there, forward and backwards, and that's your tail section. Introduce flash as needed. Now you're going to take the rest of your tubes and you're going to rinse and repeat that, but with hollow ties. And as you progress forward, you're just going to open them up more and more. And you're going to lay them all out on your table and compare angles and make sure you like how the silhouette's going to progress. Then we're going to build our beast. So now instead of developing the skill of tying on hard monofilament in hand, I can take the techniques that I'm already comfortable with from, tying on hook shanks and just hollow tying a small tube section, but the finished product is going to be nearly identical to the monofilament version. So now that I got all the sections done, I'm going to grab some 30-pound hard monofilament leader material and we'll build a beast. To close this, I'm just going to tie an overhand knot. My vice grips weren't set very tight. Trim that tag end short. And then I'm going to hit that knot with just a tad bit of glue. Just one little brush stroke. Now as we slide these on, I'll show you how the stinger hook rig would work with large rigid tubing. But I want to build this first. And so basically you're just going to come in, kind of get the hair out of the way, and thread on one section at a time. And that 30-pound really fits quite perfectly. Now remember, these are all 3/4 inch. So right now we should have a 3/4 inch space between 1 and 2, and between 2 and 3. Now if you want the other ones to get closer together, you can just come into the back side and trim out. Make sure you don't cut your bucktail. Get that hair out of there. You can just trim out a small fractional section of tubing. And now you can increase the density of these tubes as they go together. When you do that, you might ovalize the tube a little bit, so you got to round it back out so you can get your 30-pound in there. So now shorten the space between, 4 and 3. Put them slightly closer together. And I'll do that again for the next two. So that gives you 100% complete control over the spacing, just like the mono does, without any need to change your tying skill or technique base, tying on small rigid tubes that are ultra lightweight, and that's a beast tail. Look how sick that is, and you have just complete control. Now if you don't like if one of these in the middle is flared more than the other, well, you just thread them off and then thread them back on in a different order. And you can obviously do color combo changes and different flash changes. I mean, the customizability of the rig, it's through the roof. It really is through the roof. So let me walk you through the Stinger rig build real quick. Now you can do your Stinger rigs in a handful of different ways. You can kind of put a crimp sleeve on here so you have a loose connection to your hook. The problem is these single hooks, they'll kind of get fouled on a loose loop like that. You can see it's even happening now. And they'll get turned upside down in your fly. But this is kind of the best rig, I suppose, for doing it with the tubes. You can do it rigid, but then the tubes and the mono are going to be, you know, they'll fight each other, meaning that the hook eye will kind of deflect these tubes off into a weird angle. But you could do it rigid, meaning that the titanium is literally threaded through the hook eye so that the hook's position is in 100% control. Or you could do probably everybody's least favorite rig because this is fly fishing, but you could do a drop or treble. And that one won't foul at all, and it's kind of the bee's knees as far as hookups and all that. But I know people don't like trebles. But what you do is you'd have those first three on there, and then you would just thread that large rigid tube over your mono and over both pieces of titanium, and you do it again. So then you'd have a fully functioning Stinger rigged beast tail multi-jointed tube section. And of course the monofilament's a placeholder. That could be nylon coated stainless steel. It could be a third strand of titanium going the full length with a crimp sleeve to stop the tubes. That way the whole rig's bite proof. I mean, take it where you want to take it, but that's how you thread it on. And then of course you would tie down the tubes on the mono so they can't go anywhere, and then you'd thread that down in through the hook eye so the Stinger rig can't pull out. And now you have an extended body tail section with a Stinger rig. So I know there was a lot of nuance in that video on the particular rigging and tube sizes and stinger hooks and all that stuff, but hopefully it was helpful to give you some context for what's going on. I'm going to tie this small rigid tubed beast fly tail onto a hook here and get this guy finished off. So thanks for watching, guys. Let's see how this bad boy swims, eh? This thing is flooding big time.